Here's your word for the day from Calvary in Lake Havasu. Visit us on the web at calvaryaz.com.
Well, hey there. Thanks for tuning in to Your Word for the Day from Calvary. My name is Robert. It's good to be with you today as we continue to study the book of Mark and understand who Jesus is a little better and what his teaching, what his character is. And as you dive deep in Scripture and really seek to understand who Jesus was and how he lived, we get to see different perspectives and moments in the life of Jesus that aren't necessarily in the highlight reel. One of those was shared last week. Pastor Chad shared the story of Jesus cursing the fig tree that on the surface level seems very interesting and out of character until we understand a little bit more of what was going on there. And then the story continues in Mark 11 with another moment that is not necessarily that thing that we would expect from the Prince of Peace, Jesus himself. In Mark chapter 11, starting in verse 15, he says this, and then they came to Jerusalem, and he, that is Jesus, entered the temple, began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you've made it a den of robbers. And the chief priests and scribes heard it and were seeking to find a way to destroy him. For they feared him because the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they came out of the city. Now, as a side note, I always chuckled at the whole what would Jesus do movement of the early 2000s and wanted to say, well, flipping tables is not outside the realm of possibility of what Jesus would do. Not likely, but it happened. So what's going on here? Why does Jesus have such a strong visceral reaction that is maybe not what we would expect, as I mentioned? Well, we see a couple of things happening first. There's money changers. And so when people would travel to the temple, each male would have to pay the temple tax in a shekel. And so they may not come with shekels, so they would have to exchange it. And it's clear from kind of some inferences of Scripture, but also from other historical documents that wasn't always a fair money exchange. They were profiting off of the fact that to follow the Old Testament laws, they would have to come and pay their temple tax. And there's money being made by people trying to come and worship God. The same thing was happening with the animal sacrifices. So they would come and they would need to bring a lamb or a pigeon or a dove or whatever was appropriate for their situation and their circumstance to sacrifice to the Lord. And it can be challenging to travel long distances with animals, so they would purchase them when they were there. But that also was not fair. There was gross amounts of money being made off of that. And essentially what you have there is Jesus walks into the temple, this place where God is supposed to be exalted and people are exalting their businesses, where there's prayer and worship supposed to be happening. Instead, you have a mini form of the New York Stock Exchange with people swapping money and swapping animals and shouting, trying to get business. And he's like, you guys have missed the point. You're completely adulterating what the temple, what God's house is supposed to be. And really what's underneath all of that is that people were coming to a place of worship, to where God was supposed to be honored and exalted, and they were coming with their own priorities and agendas. And we may not be swapping shekels at the front door of our church or, exchanging a lamb for a dove or anything like that. But I do wonder if we come with the wrong agenda and motives. If we come so that people would see us and think differently than us. If we sit in particular spots and we act a certain way so that people would think of us highly. If we want to find ways to profit of our involvement with church and with worship. And Jesus is there to remind us that just because he's meek, it doesn't mean that he's weak. He is very powerful and will use that power to bring justice and righteousness to those places that have gone astray. So let's make sure that wherever we're approaching God, we're doing so correctly, that we're coming with the heart and the desire that matches what he's called us to do. Not just in a worship setting, but in every situation of life. Let's follow his agenda and his priorities so that we don't have to be on the receiving end of his justice. I hope that you have a great day, Calvary. We'll see you next time.